Before I talk about policy, I just want to talk about the political environment for a moment. And this is something that I've been involved with since I started in the legislature in 2003. I believe that the politics of destruction are replacing a real policy debate, and I think this is actually a threat to our basic government institutions. When everything is considered a lie and nothing is accepted as true policy differences, I think citizens start to lose confidence in government. Now, I think elected officials, the media, and even people in the public all share responsibility to concentrate on the policy differences and not really engage in name-calling and personal attacks. I think it truly is a threat to America's governmental institutions and to the institution of state government in New Jersey, such as headlines that say Christie lied or Hillary should be locked up. You know, if you believe there should be a trial and you have evidence to support that, that can be framed in a debate in a civil way. But when we come to conclusions that all government leaders, elected or campaigning for office, are either criminals or liars, and those are the conclusions of either citizens or people in the media or other government officials, I think it's more than a disservice. I think it starts to break down the basic institutions of government. So, and I'm going to continue to talk about that because I think it's extremely important. You could get to a point where this so-called, in my judgment, political campaigning, people believe that's reality. Now, I'm not a big fan that government is the most efficient type entity that exists in our society, but I do have hope in America and some confidence in government, though I believe that there's a lot of work to be done. So I'm going to re-emphasize, as I did during our swearing in a year and a half ago, and as I talked about in actually a simple civility resolution when I first got in the legislature. So on that note, let me talk about some of my policy issues. This may not reflect my entire caucus. Some of the members will disagree on some of these, but generally I think there's consensus. First, gerrymandering. This concept of gerrymandering contributes to polarization of both the political parties and citizens. Because when you have districts that are extreme in terms of partisanship, it breeds extreme representation. I put in a bill, others have put in a bill, to try to make districts more competitive. Because if you have a competitive district, you will then have elected officials who are governing from the center. And as Governor Tom Kean once said, 70% of the people in New Jersey want to govern from the middle. So I'm going to ask the Speaker and the Senate President to consider posting some of these bills, or at least having a debate on the floor of the Assembly or the Senate on an issue of partisan districts and how we fix that. I also have a bill that actually requires mandatory meetings quarterly between the leaders of the legislature and the governor. Every single corporate entity is mandated to have these meetings. Now, all of us can agree that a face-to-face meeting in a room breeds discussion. All of us have had phone calls with people, and somehow that is not as an effective tool in terms of reaching a consensus as is face-to-face meetings. So I mimic the private sector by asking the Speaker and the Senate President at least to post this bill and/or have a discussion about it. School funding fairness. The governor has toured the state on what I think is probably one of the most important pro-taxpayer ideas that we could possibly address in the legislature, and that is start to redistribute education monies in a more fair way. Now, the Democrats may agree or disagree on what the governor's number is, but all of us can agree that there should be some shifting of funding to some suburban districts and districts who are disproportionately disfavored by the present system. We should take this out of the hands of the Supreme Court. We should have a constitutional amendment for fair funding, and I wait to see whether my friends across the aisle will at least have a counter proposal that makes school funding more fair, which directly affects property taxes. We have 5 sessions from now until December. We have 10 committee sessions. At least have a discussion on changing the funding formula so it's more fair. Even if they disagree on $6,600 per every student in the state, come up with some number. TTF, we should not leave this building, the legislature, until we see the Senate pass a bill. The Assembly did. A lot of us took a lot of heat, but we put something on the table. It is time for the Senate to come back and the Assembly to come back if the Senate passes something, but not to pass anything, not to press the button and vote for some sort of funding, to me, is simply unfair to the people in the state. It is time for them to come back and come back every day. In the real world, the president of the corporation, the corporate board of directors, and the people who work for the corporation would be there every day, and we have that responsibility. Campaign finance reform. We have a bipartisan bill, myself and at least 2 or 3 Democrats, Troy Singleton being one, that says it's time for these independent groups to be more transparent. If the independent groups have more and more power in the election process, then there's more and more responsibility on government to make them transparent and find out who is supporting what. Because we know when people support a independent expenditure group, they're doing it for a reason. I don't have a problem with that. Identify who they are and identify the contributors. You know, there's the late Pete Biondi once said that he said, whatever you do, don't do anything. Because in this, and I didn't know what he said when he first told me that, every time you do something, there seems to be an attack. So I think to some degree, by not being here, the legislature somehow not being around, you're not subject to an attack. That's why I'm here. I think we need to come back here and address these issues, whether it be TTF, whether it be school funding. In addition, we have a pension and health benefit crisis. Declan O'Scanlan has a bill that simply changes health benefits from platinum to gold level benefits for state employees, which we all know the governor's talked about the penalty for us down the road. Why not have a discussion on the floor of the legislature? At least have a discussion if you don't want to post a bill. That is billions of dollars that either can go into pension and can save taxpayer money because we can return money to citizens. It requires and demands a discussion on all of these subjects. And finally, affordable housing. Another area that there's been very limited discussion by the legislature, and I would call for the legislature to reinstitute RCAs, which are regional contribution agreements. Why should we not support urban centers with monies that come from suburban districts where they can create new housing, affordable housing, housing that's near transportation centers? This was taken away, I think, in 2008. I think Speaker Roberts was against it. But I think things have changed in New Jersey. The economy has changed, and consequently, I think it's time for us to reinstitute RCAs, which I think were, most people would agree, were fairly successful. Doesn't have to be all of your affordable housing obligations, but certainly some portion of them should be able to be transferred into urban districts. So in conclusion, we got to get to work on all of these topics. And once again, we need to do it in a substantive way, on the floor, an open discussion, not necessarily in one committee, but on the floor, open discussions. And that I thank everybody for coming, and I hope that we can look like a progressive legislature, a legislature that is at least talking, getting things done, as opposed to simply press conference versus A's press conference against B's press conference, and C gets up and argues in his press conference and her press conference. That's no way to run a company or a state.